Well, hello, everyone. Happy Friday. I am Charles Wayne, social media coordinator at Ellevate Network, and I'm your host for today. Thank you for joining us for closing session of Mobilize Women Week, Equal for All, being allies, advocates, and accomplices. As you probably have heard by now, Mobilize Women is a movement based on Ellevate Network's purpose of achieving equality for all. We work towards equality by giving diverse voices, and particularly those of a woman, a seat at the table where decisions are made. For those of you not familiar with Ellevate, we are a coalition of ambitious, supportive women and allies who show up for each other and mobilize to change the culture of business. We believe that no matter what your goals are or what challenges you're facing, having people you can turn to is invaluable. If you have joined us throughout the week, you have had a chance to engage in honest discussion with some of today's most thought-provoking leaders. From creating a human-centric culture, how to lead through changing priorities, managing mental health and self-care, to raising our voice through civic action. We have covered a lot of ground this week. And if you join our signature events like our mentoring meetup and our roundtables, I'm sure you have met some people who, like you, want to use their power and influence for equality. Today, we believe highlighting diverse voices, opinions, and stories is even more important than ever. And today, in our last session, as we prepare to discuss equity, and active allyship, a topic that is so central to our belief, we do like to begin with a moment of silence for Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Elijah McClain, and countless more who have lost their lives because of the flaws in our system and the racism that is rooted in the fabric of our nation. So thank you, and thank you all for loudly joining us time and time again to say Black Lives Matter. Mobilize Women, our capstone event, lies at the center of our mission. It's through Mobilize Women that we take the time to reflect on our own journey, commit to making a mark on our workplaces, and to using our voices and power across the community at large. After all, change doesn't happen magically. It's up to all of us. So today, during today's session, we'll be joined by a lineup of incredible speakers, and there will be time for them to answer your questions at the end. So now, a few housekeeping tips. So please use the chat to engage with each other and our speakers. Quote cool things you hear to amplify the message. Drop helpful links to life-changing books, website, or apps. We're all one big community showing up. So let's get connecting. And also post your question in the Q&A box for the moderator to see, and click the CC closed caption icon to toggle them on. If you need it, you can privately message the Ellevate team. We can be identified as the host and co-host of the session and have Ellevate in our names. We are recording the session and streaming to Ellevate Facebook page. The recording will be posted to the Ellevate site for our members to view as an evergreen resources. And by the way, did you know you can become a free member today? So please go and visit ellevatenetwork.com for more information. And last but not least, please go to mobilizewoman2020.com to have a true Mobilize Woman experience where actions speak louder than words. Find, learn, act, engage activity for each session, and share your pics and posts with each other from your part of the universe. Use hashtag Mobilize Woman to share what you're learning. We're big, we're global, but we're always in this together. So once again, thank you for tuning in, and please, please welcome Janae Ingren, Director of 21st Century Community Initiatives at Airbnb, Laura Ritchie, Board Director, Synchrony Financial, Bright Horizons, and former President of WMBA, and Sandra Phillips Rogers, Group VP, General Counsel, and Chief Legal Officer, Chief Diversity Officer at Toyota Motor North America, and our moderator, Caroline Fairchild, Editor-at-Large, LinkedIn News.
Hello, hello. Thank you all so much. Can you hear me? Everyone can hear me, I'm assuming? I've been very excited for this conversation all week, and thank you so much to Ellevate Network for allowing me to talk to this amazing lineup of speakers that we have for you today. We're having a conversation around active allyship, and I really want to emphasize the word active in this conversation. We have three incredible women who are going to talk to us about their careers, what they've seen on the ground, and how they're really doing the work right now within their own companies to ensure equity in the workplace. It's something that I've been covering throughout my career as a journalist, and I'm so excited to speak with this amazing panel of women. I'm actually first going to sit down with Sandra. She's with us from Toyota, and we're going to have a conversation. I'm then going to welcome Janae into the conversation, and then Laurel, and then at the end, I'm going to bring all three of these women into the party for a conversation, and we're going to answer your questions. So we deal with this virtual reality of a panel, but where I want to start is with some data. I have been researching and reporting this topic of allyship, for my career. And, if you look at Lean In, they recently did a survey, and more than 80% of white employees like myself see themselves as allies, but Black women and Latinas, they just disagree with this inherently. 45% of Black women say that they have strong allies, and only 10% of Black are white. So a good point for us to jump into discussion. Why does this disconnect exist?
Carolyn, first, let me just say thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with your audience. And also let me recognize that while we're speaking right now, we have the NAACP sponsored virtual march on Washington to commemorate and remember the 57th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King. So with that, it's hard to say why there's a disparity. I think it could be that some people confuse what allyship really means. Perhaps they think that if they have a coffee or they recognize someone in a meeting or they know something about them personally, that makes them an ally. But I think to your opening point, allyship is much more active. It's about really standing up and seeing and acknowledging those who have been historically underrepresented or marginalized. And it means doing something that tangibly makes a difference, giving an assignment opportunity or exposure to clients or promotion opportunity. So I think that if there's that disconnect, that means that perhaps the allyship isn't going far enough to actually result in something tangible and visible to those groups who are historically underrepresented.
Right. And when we spoke earlier this week, the key word that I picked up from you is sacrifice. This idea that you can't just, like you said, have a coffee and then call yourself an ally. Why, when you talk about sacrifice, talk to the panel, the people that we have in the stream here a little bit more about what you mean by that.
I guess what I think about is coming up in the legal profession in particular, there's always been a sense that as maybe one of only a few African-American women that I was, representing my race. I've heard people say that to me, and sometimes indeed I felt that way. But I think with allyship, you almost step into those shoes. You too become a representative. You too become someone who is willing to sponsor someone or bring them up in an organization and risk if there is any type of atmosphere of, well, he or she is now kind of it's breaking ranks somehow, or this person, if they've sponsored them, then they're going to have to make sure that they succeed. And if things don't go well, then they'll have to try to work and make that right. But that's what you've got to be willing to do. You've got to be willing to take a chance, to take an opportunity, and keep going with it to its logical conclusion. It isn't about just saying, okay, here's this person for this project. It's about, okay, I've recommended you for this project. What do you need from me? How can I help you be successful in that project? And then how can I give you some really good feedback that you can turn into the next project? And so it's kind of the coffee thing. You can't just have the coffee and take the time, which is important, but you've got to also be down there in the trenches. You've got to advocate for them. You've got to stand up for them. You've got to help make sure that they succeed to every extent that you possibly can. And then you've got to continue to mentor so that they can continue to grow and develop, because most of what we're talking about with allyship is just give us an opportunity, just give us a chance to show what we can do. But I think allyship, true allyship, calls on us to make sure that we are a bit of a Sherpa in a way. We've got to make sure that we're with that person in their journey so that they can experience maximum success.
Right. And for that to really happen at scale, big companies like Toyota, they have to be doing their part in terms of making sure that this message is being heard by managers in particular. I'm curious, how have these conversations changed within Toyota since, say, Black Lives Matter protests started up again after George Floyd's death?
I think everybody in the world, really, but certainly in the United States and in our corporate communities, are feeling the need to act in this moment. At Toyota, we have two fundamental principles: respect for people and continuous improvement. And from that, we build our company. From that, we build all of our great processes that we're known for. And it's also where we build our diversity. And when all of this hit an inflection point, because we know this is an old story, it's been going on for hundreds of years, but Mr. Floyd's tragic death gave, I think, corporate America an opportunity to really refocus, recommit, and really be introspective, as well as look out into the community to see where can we help make some differences. And again, you hate to have someone die for this to happen, but I think everybody realizes we've got to make this moment, this movement count. And so what I'm seeing, Carolyn, is a lot more willingness to have discussions on tough topics of race. We had Emmanuel Acho come and talk about difficult conversations, and I got more feedback from that about how that really helped understanding about how you talk about race. Just yesterday, we had an impromptu session to talk about the shooting of Jacob Blake. And there was no agenda other than to hear expressions and understand where team members are. And then in the end, we talked about, well, what can we do to try to make some change in our communities with policing and trying to bridge the racial equity gap. But that's the big thing. People are talking now. And not only are they talking, but they want to do something. They want their voices and their talents and their know-how. They want to put that to action. And so that's the biggest change that I've seen. It's really kind of put a lot of existing efforts on steroids, if you will, because again, companies like Toyota, we're not new to the social justice space. We have contributed, $30 million in the African American community for years. But what we found is this moment gives us a chance to refocus, not only in what we're doing in our communities, but what we're doing in the company.
Right. I'm so glad that you brought up that topic of uncomfortable conversations, because I've heard from so many experts that nothing is going to change unless we are having these uncomfortable conversations in the workplace. When we spoke earlier this week, we talked about all the buzzwords: allyship, diversity, inclusion. For the white allies that are in the stream right now, what would you say to them in terms of why we have to have these uncomfortable conversations, particularly around race? People don't want to talk about race. White people do not like to think of themselves as having a race. Why are these things challenging in terms of us getting over this hurdle in the workplace specifically?
Well, I think in society and in the workplace, it's a similar thing. I don't know anybody who's really just bucking to talk about difficult topics of any nature. But the history of race in this country, it's so pervasive and it has been around for so long. I just don't think that as a country we've reckoned with it, that we found ways to acknowledge it and move forward. And so as a consequence, it sets up a dynamic in workplaces and communities, even in families, of where there's a feeling of blame, attribution, maybe even shame. And then on the other side of it, there's a feeling of frustration of why can't we have these conversations? Maybe even a feeling of lack of respect or lack of dignity or lack of humanity. So you put those two together, it's hard to bridge that. And so what we're saying is, look, this is difficult for everyone. But if we're going to heal, if we're going to move forward, if we're going to make progress, if we're going to make real change, the very first thing you have to do is educate yourself around it, understand what the condition is, and then try to move forward with measures to address it. I think what we've seen in our society is folks try to move to the countermeasure. They try to move to the fix. But they're not going through that process of really understanding and talking and getting it out. There's no one way to do it. I don't know if there's a best way to do it. But I do know that when people are talking and engaging and being respectful, even where there's disagreement, the opportunities are really endless. And I think as a society, we've moved into corners. That's a very dangerous place to be because there's not a lot of understanding and empathy that goes on when you're in opposite corners. And so, to move forward, we've got to have these conversations. It's just that simple. Having said that, the conversations are difficult, and we know this. But I believe this is where respect for people comes into play. Respect for those who are those who are wanting to be a part of the discussion, know how. But this is where education and tools and tutoring and acknowledgments and encouragement comes into play. And that's what we're trying to do at Toyota. This isn't, okay, well, you figure it out. This is, we'll figure this out together, but we all have an individual responsibility to help make progress.
I see a comment here in the chat from Madeline who's saying it can be so uncomfortable to have these conversations, but as an ally, I recognize that slight discomfort I feel is so minimal compared to the fear and discomfort that underrepresented groups experience. So Madeline, thanks for sharing that in the chat.
That's good.
Sandra, as you think about building a culture of inclusion, and again, these buzzwords, what are the inherent qualities that you look for in leaders that you're bringing on to Toyota, and how do they navigate themselves in meetings, say, differently than someone who isn't really thinking with an inclusive mindset?
Let me mention that we're having our second annual Diversity and Inclusion Month, and one of the real themes of it is acts of inclusion. So on this day, the thing that we're asking team members is to find a business partnering group or to find an outside community to invest in. And so yesterday or the day before, it could have been find someone to say hello to that you've never spoken to, or, speak up when people are included. That's really what the opportunity is for our leaders, is to find ways to systemically put diversity and inclusion into practice every single day, every minute of the day. And so what I think our leaders at Toyota do is they look and see if it's time to staff a project. Is it being covered from a diversity and inclusion standpoint? if you're in a meeting and there's always the one or two that speak a lot and they have great ideas and we love them. But what about the people who are saying nothing? And you want to go back to the prior topic, Caroline, that's so important. When you're not hearing from people on these difficult issues of race, you really need to find a way, if not in public, but in private, call them out. Because what I often find in my group is that some of the best ideas come from those who are not comfortable speaking out for whatever reason. Maybe they feel like their ideas are going to be laughed at. There's been books written on this. But the bottom line is our leaders are looking to be inclusive in all activities. You're thinking about an idea, who can you staff for this project? Who can I give an opportunity to that is not the usual cast of characters? I think that's the toughest thing as a leader. You've got people who are superstars, you can count on them and you can go to them, and that's great. And hopefully these individuals get their due, they get their acknowledgments. But I think as leaders, we have to be thinking about, okay, what about those who don't automatically get that nod, or who may be coming to a project with a different experience or different skill sets? I think one of the things we really have to watch out for is thinking that there's only one way to deal with an issue or one set of a project or to make a promotion. And it's kind of like we've drawn these lines of, we're rating or ranking people. I remember being in a conference with Gloria Steinem, and she said the most powerful thing about circles. If we move to circles where there's no ranking or rating, that's where inclusion really comes in, where everybody's the same and everybody's contributing. That's the utopian society that I strive for every day.
Well, Sandra, I know I speak for a lot of people who are joining us right now, and I think a lot of us are striving for that, and so appreciate your work and your insights. This has been a great conversation. I already see some questions in the chat that we'll get to once we speak to the other speakers, but thanks so much for this conversation, and we'll bring you back in at the end.
All right, thank you.
Right. And with that, I'm going to bring on Janae from Airbnb, who's going to join us for the next portion of this amazing panel that we have set up for you today. I don't know if Janae, there she is. Hello. Janae is coming to us from maternity leave. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm currently on maternity leave, about 5 weeks in to motherhood. So yeah, it's a great
tell us a little bit about your bundle of joy. 5 weeks in joining us.
Oh,
yes.
Her name is Jaya, and she's a fiery spirit. She's a fighter already at 5 weeks. She's my world. I love her. I'm just so in love, and motherhood is amazing.
Well, I don't know if you have the chat open, but there's like hundreds of congratulations from the women who are joining us in the allies in the stream. So this is from all of us. Okay, Janae, let's just dive right in here. Okay, you've had such an incredible career working in civil rights, to being a co-founder of the women's movement, to now being at Airbnb. Why did you make the jump to Airbnb? What's the work that you're doing there, and why is it important to you?
It's a great question, and one that I have gotten a lot, to go from, as you said, civil rights leadership to the Women's March and then to Airbnb. It seems a little bit like a disconnect. I think for me, when I was going through the process of being recruited by Airbnb, I wasn't actually quite sure myself that this is somewhere that I would end up. I sort of said yes because a mentor asked me if I would be interested in, and out of professional courtesy to her, I said yes. But as I started the process of researching the company and learning a little bit about the work that they were doing, what I found was a company that was unlike what I had perceived, a company with a mission of creating belonging in the world, and a company who was really willing to do the hard work that so often I think, sometimes it's not always seen in corporate America, where companies are willing to really put forth the effort beyond just a press release when things go wrong, to really do the hard work that is required and to put resources behind it. And so when I started with Airbnb, it was shortly after Airbnb While Black. It was a tumultuous time for the company. But again, they had put a lot of resources and a lot of effort into addressing the racism that people were experiencing on the platform. And that work continues today. And so that was in 2016 that Airbnb While Black started. We're now in 2020, and that work is by no means coming to an end. I mean, it's continuing sort of in perpetuity, and that's come from the top. So that's sort of how I pivoted to Airbnb. I see it as a connection point to my advocacy work, and just really excited about some of the initiatives that we've had recently. Pertinent to this conversation, we recently put out an activism and allyship guide that I'll put in the chat for folks. It's something that I worked on with a few members of our employee resource group, our Black employee resource group, shortly after the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. And it's things like that that allow me to feel like my work is not necessarily any different. My advocacy and my activism work is no different. It occupies a different space.
Right, because increasingly we're just seeing companies having to take a bigger stance in terms of the issues that are important to them. That guide that you mentioned, what are some key parts of it? How did you go about putting it together?
Well, a lot of it was me sort of using my background in civil rights and activism and advocacy, and understanding that not everyone comes to this journey, this activism and allyship journey, from the same place. And really creating a model and a tool that people can use no matter where they are in their journey. So if you are, as we're talking about allyship and accompliceship, what do those things mean? And what is the difference? Someone in the chat wrote a question that I saw when Sandra was speaking, who, by the way, that conversation was just phenomenal, and I'm so glad I got to witness it. Someone asked a question about, they're a white person and they feel discomfort talking about race and racism with other white people. And that's part of this journey, right? Like, when you're an ally, it is first understanding your privilege, understanding the way that you show up, and how who you are serves different advantages to you, and how those advantages look different from other people who may even be sort of similar, who on paper may have the same similar characteristics outside of a few differentiators. And so really understanding the privilege that all of us have, and how we can use and leverage that privilege to create equity for other people, for more marginalized communities. Then you get to the place of being an accomplice, and really just leveraging that advantage, that privilege, to create space for other people. And so I used a lot of what I had learned and had worked on. Sandra talked about uncomfortable conversations. In the Women's March, we talked about daring discussions. We had a whole daring discussions guide. That's something that's in the resources that I'll share with folks. And so really pulling on a lot of what I had learned throughout my career to share with other people, understanding that people are going to come into the journey at different points. And no matter where you start, there's something for you there.
And let's talk a little bit about your career, specifically as it relates to allyship. Have there been specific moments where allies have really shown up for you that you think would be helpful for the people in the chat, or maybe even more importantly, people who thought that they were being an ally, but maybe were not going all the way to the sacrifice portion of this important conversation that Sandra and I were having earlier?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think I can think of examples of situations where Belinda Johnson, who used to be the COO of Airbnb, phenomenal woman, very smart. I've had the pleasure of working with her and underneath her. And I remember being in a meeting where we were introducing a new executive, and I hadn't spoken, and she like stopped the meeting, and she was like, "No, I want you to speak." And that's a moment where it was less about race in that moment or anything like that, but it was in that moment about acknowledging that someone had not spoken. And normally I speak a lot, so that's typically not a problem. But I think in that moment, saying, I want to be an ally. This is a really important opportunity for you to weigh in and give your thoughts. I think, in terms of places where maybe there people haven't been allies, it actually, we're having a conversation that's sort of rooted in race right now, but I think also many of us are women on this call. And when I think about times that maybe I haven't had people be allies, it's being in rooms with men who often will not want you to talk or minimize the opportunity for you to talk, who will talk over you, who will say, oh, jump in, but monopolize and dominate the conversation. And it's in those moments that I think, for me, that's the moment where it's a teachable moment to say to someone afterwards, hey, we were in this meeting and you told me to speak, but then you dominated the whole conversation. That's not being a great ally. That's not being someone who is ceding your privilege in order for me to have a space at the table and have the opportunity to contribute in a meaningful way.
Right. And justice and equality, these have been themes throughout your entire career. I'm curious, as you speak to other corporate leaders, maybe other leaders in tech since the killings of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery, how have the conversations changed? Are we going to see more companies talking about social justice issues? What's top of mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I really only represent Airbnb, but I do have friends who work at other tech companies. And I think even beyond the tech landscape, I think it's the corporate landscape. And what we're seeing is that this is a moment where companies aren't going to be allowed to do business as usual. There's not going to be this moment where you issue a press release and you say, oh, we're contributing this amount of money and that's sort of it. I think this moment is really calling on companies to really do more and really examine the ways that inequities exist within their own businesses. It started, I remember sort of the moments after George Floyd's death, and you started to see the protests, and you started to see small little incremental things that were happening, companies coming out with commitments saying we stand with Black Lives Matter, which in and of itself is a whole shift away from anything that we had seen before, including the time in 2014, 2015, I was still in civil rights in that moment. I had planned the funeral for Michael Brown. I had, worked with the families of Eric Garner and all of these others, and had not seen anything to this magnitude. And I think that's been the real change maker. It's been people putting pressure on companies to say, it's not enough for you just to say Black Lives Matter, because the next step was, okay, so what are you going to do about it? Like, it's not enough to just say it. How are you putting your dollars behind this? How are you, contributing in any meaningful way? And you started to see companies giving money. And then the next thing was, tell us about your internal diversity. And companies really start to have to look at those things that, it's not enough to just do these basic things, these baseline things of saying that you support and stand with Black lives or contributing money to marginalized communities, but starting to really examine their own internal diversity and things that they're doing. For us, we launched Project Lighthouse, which was something that we had been working on for about 2 years, really addressing systemic racism and discrimination on our platform. Excuse me. And we did that in partnership with Color of Change and a lot of other organizations in the civil rights and social justice space. And it's something that we're really proud of because it does address the potential for systemic discrimination that exists on our platform. And it will help us create tools and practices that address those things and create a more equitable experience for everyone. And so I think in this moment, you're going to see more of that. We just obviously had the killing of Jacob Blake, and you see that the NBA is like, NBA teams are saying we're not going to play. You had the Brewers who were saying we're not going to play. And so this is a moment where things are going to be required that go beyond the comfort level that I think many companies have been used to in the past. And I think that that's exactly what we need right now in order to really see the needle move.
Right. And it's so great to see companies like Airbnb leading by example here. But for those who are joining us in this conversation right now, who say, are companies that aren't being progressive, are companies that aren't having open conversations about race, what's your advice to them in terms of how they can use their own personal power to elicit change from within their own companies?
That is a great question. I've been fortunate because I work at a company where everyone from our CEO, there's a culture there that exists that is welcoming and willing to embrace the ideas of what we're talking about: activism, allyship. When I mentioned the allyship guide that I created along with some of my colleagues, that wasn't something that we created for the public. It was something that we created as an internal document, and the company said, no, we want to put this out. And so that's a different thing than companies who don't even want to have the conversation with their internal stakeholders. And I think realistically, it's about, I'm going to say something that may be a slightly controversial, and I would say it's a little bit of an inside-outside game. This is a moment where if you feel willing to speak up and speak out, starting within the walls of your company, and if those things aren't being heard, where are the resources externally that you can pull on that can help create those conversations, those daring discussions, those difficult conversations, courageous conversations, because this is a moment for change that has to happen. And sometimes it requires an anonymous reporting. I've seen that in other companies, where you have former employees or current employees who write anonymous blogs and say, look, this is happening in this company and we need this to change. And using that as a tool and as a lever to really create that change is a way that I think, if you're not getting that traction internally, if people aren't willing to listen, if people aren't willing to make change, the necessary change, sometimes you have to, take another step. And because we're in the moment that we're in, I think this is the time to do it.
Well, Janae, this has been such a great conversation. I see so many people in the chat really resonating with all of your insights. I feel like I've learned a lot personally. Go give that baby girl a quick kiss. We're going to bring you back on here after I speak with Laurel, but thanks so much for talking with us.
Thank you so much.
All right, and now I'm going to invite Laurel Ritchie to the stream. She's the board director at Synchrony Financial, Bright Horizons, and she's also the former president of the WNBA. So Laurel, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. I'm really excited to be with everyone today.
So I don't think we can start this conversation anywhere else but with the WNBA, with the news out earlier this week that they're postponing games in the light of the shooting of Jacob Blake. When you read that as the former president, what was your response?
I was just so incredibly proud. I had the pleasure of leading those 144 amazing women for 5 seasons, and I was very proud that they were taking a stand using their platform. But quite frankly, I was not surprised. My experience of the women of the WNBA is from the beginning, they have recognized their role in society and been very committed to being a force for good. I often thought that my work there was showing the world what women can be as athletes and what athletes can be as citizens. And I think they brought it. They brought it.
Right. And I wanted to get your response. I saw that, the tennis star Naomi Osaka, she tweeted, in various social media posts, she said, "Before I'm an athlete, I'm a Black woman." What does that statement mean to you? And how would you describe that statement to a white woman like myself who can't resonate with that like she is?
Yeah, well, my hope is that you would find a piece of yourself in that, right? So you are a woman in a society that is dominated by men in many ways. And so I think this moment in time for us is about finding ways to identify with each other, to build empathy and to build allyship, and to join together in support of visibility and equality for all. So while you may not respond, or your lived experience may not be identical to hers, I suspect that there are parts of your lived experience that are related and form the beginning of a powerful bridge of work that can be done together.
I think that that's so powerful, just thinking about what does resonate and what does connect us, even if our lived experiences are very different. You're sitting on a lot of boards right now. I'm curious, how has conversations around building equitable cultures changed since the Black Lives Matters protests began in the middle of this pandemic?
Yeah, so I would say that the two boards that I happen to serve on, Synchrony Financial and Bright Horizons, it has been part of the discussion since I joined the board. But obviously, with recent events, it's taken on a whole new level, and we've elevated those conversations. So I think all companies, I also happen to serve on the board of my alma mater, Dartmouth College, and I think all of these boards, we are looking at where are we, what have we done, what do we need to do more of. We've been doing a lot of listening, engaging all of our speakers, whether that's students and community members in the case of Dartmouth, and clients for Bright Horizons and Synchrony. I think this is a moment of reckoning for all of us. And so job one is looking internally to where are we as an institution, and then looking externally to say, how can we be a force for good, and sort of doubling down on our commitment to make progress on both of those fronts.
Great. And you've been a trailblazer throughout your career. You were the first Black woman to lead a major sporting institution. We're talking about allyship right now. And so I'm curious, some experiences, I've asked this of Janae as well, that you've had of active allyship throughout your career that you think the people who are joining us would like to hear from, but also maybe some instances in which allyship hasn't been there for you.
Yeah. So I know we began with a recognition that this was the anniversary of the March on Washington. So I'm going to digress for just a minute and say my parents made a last minute decision to go to the March on Washington. And they came back from that march so inspired by Martin Luther King's vision for America that they single-handedly integrated the neighborhood that I grew up in. So they went to buy property to build a house, and the community would not sell it to them because they were Black. A white ally of theirs bought the property, sold it to them at cost, and that's the house that I grew up in. So, at this point in time, I'm in first grade, so I'm not aware of all that's happening behind me, but that is part of DNA and part of my experience. And I look back on that and say, that's allyship, right? That is somebody joining with you, sharing your belief system, taking action, fully engaging. And I, as a first and only, in most cases, Black woman in many both educational and career experiences, my early allies were white men who, I remember I was working at Ellevate in Mather, and I was on a business, and my boss got promoted, moved on, and it was the client at the time, a guy named Dudley Lehman, I will never forget him, who went to the agency and said, Laurel is ready to lead this team. And I will never know. I'd like to believe that Ogilvy was ready and thought that as well, but I think it was his taking initiative. He didn't talk to me. He didn't say, hey, how do you feel about this? I'm going to go to on himself to sort of say, yeah, I think she's ready. So I think to me, allyship is not just expressing to an individual how you feel. It is taking action beside them, on behalf of them, that really, really makes the difference.
And I'm seeing some questions. I'm going to go ahead and take one right now, actually, before we bring everyone back on for more questions that I thought was right now. If as an ally, we see that someone is being discriminated in the workplace, say in a meeting, what's best achievement? Does it fall on allies to turn it into, and does it always fall on the allies themselves to turn it into a teaching moment?
So if I'm tracking with the question, does it fall on the ally or the individual to make it a teaching moment?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's both. That I am acutely aware, having been in business last years, that I have felt the responsibility every day, and on some days the burden of not just creating room and space for me to show up, but, you know, I hope I'm opening a door that like a whole bunch of other people are going to file through. So I think that I think one of the greatest contributions allies can make is to jump in and speak up when they see things, and not sort of witness the moment and then after the meeting go, you know, pull me aside and said, I saw this, did you see it? What do you think we should do? But to sort of own their own power and own their own insight and value system to speak up in the moment, so that it sort of shares that burden rather than always looking to take their clues from those who are being discriminated against or treated improperly.
Right. And I'm curious, as you're having conversations with other leaders in corporate America, or perhaps leaders in sports, what are they saying in terms of how the Black Lives Matter movement is changing the conversation around race? Is this going to be a critical moment that we're going to look on, hopefully in the past, and say, really change things for the better?
Yeah. All of my conversations, I think there is a feeling of great hope that we have, that hope coming from, I've had more conversations in the last X number of months about systemic racism than I have in the first 60 years of my life, right? I think, so there's an increased awareness right now of not just a racist incident, of which there are many, but the long pattern, right? You know, I think my perception is there was great awareness of the injustice of slavery, and there was great awareness of these horrific episodes that we are all witnessing together as a community. But the middle ground, people didn't have redlining, a whole bunch of racist systemic practices that I don't think there was broad awareness, appreciation of their impact. And so when I experience hope, the hope is coming from people taking this 400-year view rather than the bookends of the view. So that's one piece of it. And then I feel a greater collective responsibility with that greater understanding of the systemic nature, a greater understanding and appreciation of the multifaceted approach that needs to happen in order to make a difference. And then just sort of these horrific experiences that people say, if we do not make a difference now, that's on us. So the responsibility feels greater.
Right. And let's talk a little bit about that responsibility. The hope that you're feeling is going to go nowhere if people don't take action. So for the people who are joining us right now in the chat, if you were to tell them to do one thing right now within their companies to drive equitable cultures and be active allies, say, what would you say to them?
So I'm going to cheat a little with that because I don't know that there's one, right? But if I had to give it an umbrella, I think this is a moment for all of us to do the work, right? This is doing the work to examine personally where we are, what we've done, where we sit in this conversation, to do the work to understand where the institutions we are a part of sit, what's been done, what needs to be done, how committed we are, how we're allocating resources, and then to sort of hold the broader society accountable as well through how we engage in elections, how we give voice to things happening in our broader community. So I think it is doing the work along that continuum that always starts with the individual, but ladders up to the society.
And when you think back to your own career, what are some challenges that you faced along the way that you think that would be enlightening for the people who are joining us, in terms of, if you could go back, what would you have done differently, or what would you hope that someone else had done differently for you in your career?
Yeah. So, you know, I think luckily, because of the two parents that I had, I entered into work with confidence in my ability and a sense that there isn't an organization or a room that I don't belong in, which was a great, great gift. And I try to share that with people at any moment that I can. I think the place that took a little bit longer for me in terms of development was really figuring out, and it sounds a little bit of a cliche, but what's my superpower, right? Like all of us, we all bring something unique. And so I think I always encourage people to think about what is it beyond table stakes? What is it that, what are the ways in which they want to uniquely contribute? Because that's what diversity and inclusion is about. And the power of it is when all of us, we don't just show up authentically, because we've got to do that, but we've also got to be aware of how we are going to choose to contribute in a way that is unique to us and others can't or don't do, right? And sort of to identify that, own it, and then leverage it. You know, it took me a while to get there, and I just encourage people to do the work to figure that out early on so that you can contribute it and benefit from that contribution. And I think for me, you know, I talked about it a little bit before, but I think having been so often the first and the only, I had to make sure, to stay focused on my career and not in an egotistical way, but to make sure that as I was trying to be a role model, to open the door, to challenge perceptions, not to lose sight of, but I had a day job. And so stay focused on that day job while I'm trying to do some of these other things. And there were times where I had to say to the institutions that I worked with, I have to take a break. I think this work is important and I'm committed to paving the way, but there were so few other people of color and African American women that I often had to say, you know, this, I'm going to have to bypass on this task force, or I cannot participate in this discussion right now because I need to sort of pace myself. I need to restore myself. And then I'm going to come back and go right back at it and double down on it again. And I just think we need to give ourselves permission to balance our own lives so that we can, you know, it's kind of like when you're on the airplane and they say, put the oxygen on those kids. If you're traveling with kids, give the kid the, you know, put your own on before you can help others. And I think that's an important metaphor that I try to hold on to, of self-care so that I can be of help to others.
Well, I think that, can you hear me? I'm having some Zoom issues.
I can hear you.
Okay. It's actually asking me to restart Zoom right now. Of course, it's asking me to do this mid-conversation. Laurel, this has been such a great conversation. I'm seeing some comments in the chat saying that you have such great parents. What a gift that is. And I'm seeing a question here from Civi that I think is a great one. They want to know, can you talk a bit about the movement we're seeing in sports, which we started this conversation with, but specifically, what can other industries learn from the actions that athletes are taking right now?
Yeah. So, you know, one of the things that was so powerful to me about the WNBA and the NBA was that this, you know, this was not an athlete or a team. This was the league. This was the players in the league, and by extension, you know, I was just looking at something this morning where the referees who were on site in the bubble for the NBA had a march expressing their commitment. So I think the totality of this is a pretty good lesson for us, that this is, it appears to be athletes, coaches, league, referees, I hope owners as well. So it's the totality of it that I think speaks volume. I loved the fact that you know, Nneka Ogwumike, who is the president of leading the charge of at the Players Union for the WNBA, characterized the time as a day of reflection and informed action and mobilization. So this wasn't just, we're not playing. It was more, this is about reflection, and the calls of how they chose to use the time away from the court, I think spoke volumes, in addition to the decision collectively to take the time away from the court.
Right. And I think that that's something that no matter what industry that you're working in or what actions you can take, that introspection is what's most
Right.
important.
Introspection and the power of the collective.
Right.
And building the coalitions and coming together.
Right. Well, Laurel, I've learned so much through this conversation. Thank you so much for being so open and honest about your own career journey and your family. I feel like I've learned so much. I'm going to bring on Janae and Sandra back. We have tons of questions from everyone who's joining us right now in this conversation. So I'm going to bring both of them back into the discussion. Before we get to the questions that I'm seeing right now, I just wanted to give the panelists, you amazing women, a chance to talk to each other. Is there anything that you've picked up on from one of each other that you wanted to add to, or anything in our individual conversations that you think would benefit the people who are joining us?
You know, I'll start. I have something for Laurel just on the last question. You know, my husband has been anxiously awaiting the return of basketball, and so he's been all over it. And so I've watched it with him because I like the sport as well. But the thing that I like about what I'm seeing right now is it's a glimpse into a world of where inclusion, that's what it is. It's on there. It's during the, you know, half times, you know, during timeouts in the game. It's everywhere. And it doesn't feel like it's a bolt-on or it's coming in sideways. And it's almost to the point, you know, I'm a little bit of the choir on this, but I'd love to hear from others on it, but it feels normal. It just feels right. And I think that it's such a model of how inclusion should work, because anytime you try to make it bolt on and come sideways, to me, it just doesn't work as well. And so, Janae, I want to let you know that I've actually got your ally toolkit. That was one of the first things that came up when we were trying to populate our toolkit at Toyota. So it's already in there.
I love to hear that. That really warms my heart.
And Janae, anything to add based on conversations that I've had with these other two amazing women?
I mean, I think like I'm sitting at their feet learning, you know, and listening, and just really appreciate everything that they've both shared. Just hearing both of them speak and understanding the positions and the experience that the two of you have. I'm just grateful for all that you've done. And Laurel, you talked a lot about being the first and opening that door. And you know, I think I'm grateful for women like you and Sandra, you as well, creating opportunities, because it really is about being in the room. You can't, some of these changes you can't make exclusively from the outside. It's, again, going back to my own narrative, it's part of the reason why I felt it was important to take my advocacy and activism that I had been doing and bring it inside a corporation, because I recognize that there's real power when you're in the room, when you have the ear of the CEO and the COO, and you can make those changes. And so I know that these two women have been instrumental in doing that, both in their own fields, but just sort of broadly. And I'm grateful to be on this panel with them.
Great.
Likewise, and right back at you.
I love the sisterhood I'm seeing right now among the panelists. This is amazing. Okay. All right, we have some work to do. We have 13 questions.
Can I make one comment here that I just, that I'm reflecting on, thinking about my fellow panelists who I am honored to be with and joining. But one of the things I hope that people take away from this discussion is diversity within the Black community as well. That I hope that, you know, I think one of the things I worry about this moment in time is that in our efforts for outreach and engagement and allyship, we view the Black community as one monolithic community. And I think hopefully people will take away from this. There are many things that I have in common with my fellow panelists, but we also are different. And so I think part of the work is to appreciate and to not stereotype or limit the perception of Black people, I think is a really, or Black women, is a really important part. And so I think that we have different experiences, different background. You know, you got a mother of 5-week-old. I just think really staying open as you do the work to say, let's just keep keep the aperture of that lens wide open, and don't fall in the trap of stereotyping all Black people as identical or monolithic or shared views.
I think that's such a great point. Thanks for bringing that to the discussion, Laurel. Okay, we're going to try and get to some of the questions that we have in the chat here. I see one from Kim, and she's saying, I feel uncomfortable talking about racism with non-white people since I'm white. Do I have that right? And then she says, curious if that is the uncomfortableness that you all are talking about amongst this panel. I don't know if anyone wants to take that one.
I think that was the question. I think I may have misread that question, but it's a great question. That is part of the daring discussions, because in order for you to learn and understand the experiences of others, it is having those conversations. But I think in some respects, being mindful of how those conversations come about. You know, there's a song that Solange Knowles has called "Don't Touch My Hair." It's surprising that people will still say, "Can I touch your hair?" as a way maybe for education. And I'm using this as an example, but I think that there are many other different types of conversations that can come off and be off-putting. And so I think it's about the way that you approach having these conversations, understanding, you know, that some people don't want to have the conversation.
Yeah.
And some people don't feel that they need to be part of these conversations. And so having someone that you trust, and maybe, you know, if you're talking about within the corporate setting, or within a work setting, if there are employee resource groups or other groups that can help be a resource to you, starting there. But again, being mindful that for some people, these conversations are really painful. For some, they're annoying. And just really finding someone that you trust to start having that conversation with is important. And will probably, hopefully, make it a little less awkward. But yeah, I think it's an important part of the allyship journey.
Absolutely. I see another question here for Sandra. Oh, I saw it and I lost it. Oh, it's right here. Someone wants to know anonymously, do you have tips for facilitating no agenda meetings on topics like this? I see their value, but have also been in discussions like this that divert towards white guilt or misunderstandings.
So typically the way I start these meetings is I express my viewpoint and my intentions and hopes for the meeting. And usually in that I will acknowledge that, again, it's a difficult conversation, that many people may come at this, but that at all times we need to be respectful of people, which is one of our core pillars. And sometimes set it up and then sometimes off. But if you as the leader are, and then, you know, I'm obviously African American, so if you can find someone, I think of a different background, to also then take the baton, and then they talk about their feelings, their intentions, then that starts to soften it up. And then from there, I think you have to let expressions out, but you've got to set some ground rules that it needs to be respectful. And what I find is when team members, like the team member I mentioned where the police was following his wife for some reason, if you just let it be about the experience, don't add judgment to it, maybe don't add things that start to put people in corners, you stand a better chance. But if it happens, and it actually did happen yesterday, what you have to do is acknowledge the contribution, but then quickly pivot to a point where everyone can agree. So I mentioned Jacob Blake. Well, there was a debate about whether he had a knife. Why was he on the ground wrestling with people? Okay, if you can't get with that, don't get with that. But can you at least get to the point where you see a man trying to move away and not be an aggressor, and he's going into his car and he shot 7 times? I think at that point, we got to a place where everyone could maybe see it and agree. But I think the last thing I'll say is sometimes it happens. Sometimes people get into a place where it does feel a little bit like picking sides. But I always like to end on something hopeful and optimistic. To bring people in, how can we move forward collectively or individually? So that when you leave the meeting, you feel better about the experience than if, for whatever reason, you felt like you were picked on or singled out, or if you shared your heart that someone made fun of it. But you just have to keep moving and pivoting to make sure if it's a down moment, you lift it up. But then if it's too much fluff, you want to make sure you're getting real stories out, because that really is what's most important. That's the best I can offer.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. This is from the chat. It says, many times I felt that there is a microaggression or outright discrimination, yet I'm not sure if it stems from ignorance, and I'm not sure how to respond or speak up. What are your suggestions?
Well, I'm a big believer in always speaking up. I just think, and I think if there's uncertainty, I like to think of things in the frame of not questioning the intent, but communicating the impact. That gives somebody the benefit of the doubt. It puts it squarely on, here's how that was received, regardless of your intent. Here's how it was received. And I find that's, for me, has been an effective way to enter into the discussions, because it doesn't, oftentimes getting into a debate about somebody's intent, we stay there and never get to the impact. Where you really want the conversation to go is, here's the impact of that, and give somebody a chance to take ownership, not of their intent, but of their impact.
Such a great point.
I like that.
Add on to that, I think that's a great point, Laurel, and I agree with always speaking up. In the movement space, we would say suspend first judgment. And so similar to what Laurel was just saying, it's coming to the conversation, suspending your own judgment and beliefs about whether or not the intention was X, and really, again, to Laurel's point, speaking to the impact, and doing it, maybe if you're in a large group, not in front of everyone, but definitely pulling the person aside and being mindful that they may not have even known that what they were saying or what they were doing had the impact that it had.
Well, Janae, Sandra, Laurel, this has been such a great discussion. I've learned so much, and I can just tell from the chat, so many people have appreciated everything that you've shared. I'm going to go ahead and bring Charles back into the stream. Someone just said, I don't want this to end, but all things come to an end, unfortunately. So we're going to have to wrap this up, but Charles is going to come back with some remarks. And thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you for this conversation. It's such a great week. So once again, I just want to thank you for tuning in again, and thank you again for our panelists, Carolyn, Sandra, Janae, and Laurel, for their time and insights. And now, to officially close off Mobilize Women Week 2020, please welcome Christy Wallace, CEO of Ellevate Network.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here this week for these important conversations. Thanks so much to the Ellevate team who live and breathe this every day. To our supporters, such as RBC Wealth Management, Accenture, Columbia Business School, London Stock Exchange, Lincoln Financial, Guardian Life, Unilever, Baker Hostetler, NFP, LaFleur, and Fiera Capital. I want to mention them because we talked today about the importance of communities, and we talked about the importance of companies taking a stand, living their values, and putting their resources behind conversations like this and beyond that are going to create change. We are at a key moment in time. Janae said today, this is a moment for change that has to happen, and she is so spot on with that. This is our moment. Each of us has such power to create change. I like to think of this concept of me, we, world. We started out this week talking about the world, what is happening more broadly, and how does that impact us and our communities and the communities around us. Talking about business leadership and the importance for leaders to stand up and to do more. Today, it's about we. It's about this community that's supporting each other, having these honest conversations. And it's about me. I encourage you, please continue this work. This is not a one-shot deal. We have to keep having conversations. We have to keep learning, understanding, asking questions, and showing up for each other. We need change to happen. Every single one of you is a leader in your homes, in your communities, in your workplaces, and in the world. You can be the drivers of this change. You can be the drivers of making things more equitable and more equal for all. So please take what you learned today, take all the connections you've made this week through our roundtables and our mentoring meetups, take the inspiration and the education, and I encourage you to do more and to show up. Ellevate has programming like this throughout the year. Please continue to join us for these conversations, for more roundtables, and for more insights and actions as we continue to do more as this community and we continue to show up for each other. Thanks again for being a part of Mobilize Women 2020, for bearing with us during a virtual experience, our first time really attempting this. Our team did an amazing job, and our speakers today helped to end this on the best note possible. I'm inspired, and I'm more, and I hope you'll join me. Thanks so much.